Tabby was my best friend in high school. We were like sisters. But then we graduated. I stayed in my hometown and went to the community college here, while Tabby joined the Peace Corps and spent 5 years in East Africa. When she left, I was so excited for her. I knew she'd have these wild stories to tell me during our Zoom calls. We planned to talk at least once a week. Unfortunately, her village in Tanzania didn't have any Wi-Fi. I'd send her emails, hoping that she'd respond during her monthly trips into the city, and at first she did, but over time, it was just too hard to reach her. I'd lost my best friend. Then, after nearly 5 years of silence, Tabby sent me a message that she was back in town and wanted to see me. I can't tell you how excited I was. We met the next day for lunch. She invited me over to her house, which was the same place where she'd grown up. Her parents had just moved away, so I guess they gave it to her. When she opened the door to greet me, I was shocked by how much she looked the same. Everything about her, from her hairstyle to her clothes, hadn't changed since high school. She still looked like she was a teenager. Meanwhile, I changed a lot. I think I look pretty good, but I'm definitely not the same woman I was at 17. Tabby excitedly pulled me inside. Her living room was completely packed with all kinds of boxes and tiny wooden crafts that covered every shelf and table. Clearly, she needed time to unpack. "Sorry about the mess," she said, and led me through the piles of boxes so we could sit on the couch. She excitedly explained that she'd met someone in Tanzania. His name was Jacob. Not only were they engaged, but they'd gone into business together. All these wooden crafts in her house were authentic pieces of Tanzanian art that Jacob made himself. She gushed over how talented he was and how much they loved each other. Their plan was to create an online craft shop where Jacob handled the crafts and Tabby handled all the business stuff. They seemed really committed to each other. I looked down at the wooden figurines and bowls on the coffee table in front of me. I was about to compliment them until I recognized one of the bowls. I'd seen the exact same thing somewhere. I couldn't remember if it was at World Market or Pier 1 or something, but it was definitely at some store. Curious, I picked up the bowl to look closer. Sure enough, I saw a faded circle on the bottom where it had a price sticker. This was fake. Maybe they all were. I instantly worried that Tabby's new business partner was lying to her. "Jacob made all these himself?" I asked. "Every single one," she said. I felt my heart sink. She had no idea. Who knew how much money she'd already put into this business? I hoped it wasn't too much. I was about to tell her that the crafts were fake, but then the front door opened and her fiancé came back. Jacob was a tall African man with an almost British-sounding accent. He stuck out his hand and introduced himself. I could tell right away how he could have duped Tabby the way he did. He was confident and very hot. Jacob sat with us and joined the conversation. He kept rubbing Tabby's shoulder and kissing her cheek while he explained his love of woodwork. Tabby, who must have heard all his stories before, acted like she was hanging on every word. It was a pleasant conversation, but all I could think about was how Jacob had tricked her. I needed to say something, but I couldn't find an opening. Plus, it was such an awkward thing to bring up in front of him. Eventually, Tabby left for the bathroom. Now that Jacob and I were alone, I figured I could just level with him. I knew it would be better for Tabby to hear about the scam from him directly. So I point-blank told him that his crafts were fake. His smile faded. "You don't trust me?" "No," I said. "You want me to stay away from Tabby, don't you?" he asked. "Yes," I answered right as Tabby re-entered the room. Jacob had seen her coming, but I hadn't. Tabby looked at me like I had just slapped her. From her point of view, it must have seemed like I was the jealous friend trying to scare off her fiancé. She told me to leave. I tried to explain what happened, but she refused to listen. She basically shoved me out the door. I knew I should have given her some space and let her figure things out on her own, but I just couldn't. Every day she was probably wasting more and more of her money while Jacob bought cheap garbage and passed it off as original stuff. The longer she stuck with her doomed business, the worse off she'd be. I had to do something. I got in my car and drove around the corner so they'd think I left. Then I snuck back into their yard just to keep watch. I had a feeling I might be able to get some photo evidence of Jacob's scam. That would be the best way to force her to realize the truth. I waited in the bushes for a while, but all I saw was the two of them eating lunch together. I would have eaten with them if Tabby hadn't kicked me out. Obviously, I didn't get any evidence then, but after they were finished, Tabby did the dishes while Jacob went into the other room to unbox a bunch of store-bought garbage and peel off all the packaging and stickers. This was my proof. I took a bunch of photos, but I had to leave very quickly once it seemed that Jacob caught a glimpse of me through the window. I wasn't 100% sure that he had seen me, but I didn't want to risk it. I went back home and texted the damning photos to Tabby. She didn't respond. The little check marks in the corner showed that she didn't even open my messages. That didn't stop me, though. I went online and found out everything I could about Jacob. Apparently, he had a criminal record back in Tanzania for stealing and embezzlement. It looked like he had a really long history of scamming people. For the next few days, I drove by Tabby's house a lot. I needed to talk to her alone, but she and Jacob were always together. Then one afternoon, I finally got my chance. I saw that their car wasn't in the driveway and Tabby was all alone in the kitchen. I quickly parked and rushed to the front door. I kept knocking until she let me in. This time, there were even more boxes in the house. If anything, their business was expanding. Tabby was absolutely pissed to see me. I knew I didn't have much time before she kicked me out again, so thankfully, I brought some visual aids. I picked up some identical wooden bowls from the shop and showed her how they were identical to Jacob's supposed crafts. It was ironclad proof. Tabby took a deep breath and said, "I know." Slowly, she explained that she and Jacob were scammers together. They always had been. They'd met her first week in Africa. He convinced her to quit the Peace Corps and team up with him. They'd swindled one too many people back in Tanzania and decided to try their luck in America. This didn't sound like Tabby at all. When she left for Africa, she was full of excitement and ideals. She wanted to change the world, not rip it off. "Why?" I asked her. To answer me, she pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. I'd never seen so many digits. She was filthy rich now. And that's after buying this house for my parents, she bragged. "How could you make that much money?" I asked, assuming that they must have been involved in darker stuff too. "Because we work hard," she said, "and we don't let anyone get in the way." She stepped closer, her eyes dead serious. Someone grabbed my shoulder. I spun around to see Jacob looming behind me. He must have come in while Tabby was talking. His eyes were narrowed. "You're not gonna get in our way, are you?" They glared at me from both sides. I felt trapped. If these two were capable of stealing that much money, who knew what they'd do to me? I started to panic. No one knew I was here. If I disappeared, no one would be able to trace it back to them. I'd be a missing person forever. I was trembling. I had no idea what to do, so I eventually put up my hands and said, "Your secret's safe with me." To my total shock, they both wrapped me in a big hug. So now I'm roped into their scam too. I'm in charge of scratching up the products to make them look more authentic. I feel terrible about it, but I've already made $6,000. I never believed the stories my father told me about his youth. It was always the same tale, spun late at night, when he was feeling particularly nostalgic. "I was quite the heartbreaker back in the day," he'd say with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Girls lined up for me, but I turned them all down. I had my reasons." I always laughed it off. It was hard to imagine the man sitting across from me, with his thinning hair and deep lines etched into his face, being the object of anyone's desire. He was in his 50s, his age showing more every day. His eyes, once bright and full of life, now seemed dulled, as if the years had worn him down. One day, he told me he wanted to take me to a restaurant where he used to work when he was younger. He said it with an unusual urgency, as if this was something he had to do before it was too late. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity and because I was tired of his endless reminiscing. Maybe seeing the place would help him move on from the past he seemed so obsessed with. When we arrived at the restaurant, it was nothing special, just an old diner that had clearly seen better days. The kind of place where the seats are cracked and the jukebox in the corner hasn't worked in years. It was almost empty, just a couple of other patrons scattered around. But something strange happened the moment we walked in. My father froze in the doorway, his eyes fixed on a young man behind the counter. I followed his gaze, and my heart skipped a beat. The young man looked exactly like my father, only much younger, about 18 if I had to guess. He had the same strong jawline, the same piercing blue eyes, the same mischievous smirk I'd only seen in old photos. "That's him," my father whispered, his voice trembling. "That's me." I felt a chill run down my spine. This couldn't be real. There was no way this could be happening. But before I could say anything, my father walked up to the counter, his movements slow, as if he was in a trance. The young man, my father's younger self, looked up and smiled. "Hey there, can I get you something?" he asked, his voice full of youthful energy. My father didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at his younger self with an expression I'd never seen before, something between awe and despair. Finally, he managed to speak. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The young man looked confused but nodded. "Sure, we're not too busy right now. What's up?" They moved to a quiet corner of the diner, and I watched from a distance, my mind racing. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a hallucination, anything but reality. But the way they looked at each other, the intensity of their conversation, it was too real, too raw to be anything but the truth. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I caught fragments. My father's broken voice, his younger self's shocked responses. "You don't know what's coming," my father said, his voice cracking. "You have no idea how much you'll lose, how much you'll regret." The young man, my father's past self, looked terrified. He glanced around the diner as if trying to find a way to escape. This can't be real," he stammered. "You're me, but older. How is this possible?" My father reached out, his hand trembling, and placed it on his younger self's shoulder. "I wish I could change it, but I can't. You're going to make mistakes, terrible mistakes, and they'll haunt you for the rest of your life." Tears filled the young man's eyes as he looked into the face of his future. "I don't want this," he whispered. "I don't want to become you." "I'm sorry," my father choked out, his voice breaking completely. "I'm so sorry." They both stood there for a moment, the weight of the future hanging heavy between them. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, they hugged, clinging to each other as if trying to hold on to something they knew they couldn't keep. I wanted to move, to say something, but I was rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was witnessing. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined, a meeting of past and future, of hope and despair, all in one moment. But then something shifted. The young man, my father's past self, slowly pulled away from the embrace. His face had changed. Gone was the fear, replaced by something darker, more determined. He looked at my father with cold, calculating eyes. "Maybe I don't have to become you," he said quietly, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "Maybe I can change things." My father's face drained of color. "No, you don't understand, you can't!" But before he could finish, the young man reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. My father gasped, stumbling backward as his younger self advanced on him. "You're nothing but a warning," the young man sneered. "And I'm going to make sure I never become you." I screamed, but it was too late. The knife flashed in the dim light, and then there was only silence. When the police arrived, they found me alone in the diner, holding my father's lifeless body. There was no sign of the young man, no trace of the encounter that had shattered everything I thought I knew.
My assistant Rhonda was a complete idiot. I tried to cut her some slack, but she kept forgetting to tell me about important meetings, and whenever I needed her for something, she was off for a smoke break. I wanted to fire her so badly, but she was my boss's niece. One day, she messed up yet again my lunch order, and I was furious. I think it was mostly the hunger talking, but I snapped at Rhonda for the first time. "I'm so sorry," she said, on the verge of tears. "I forgot you were allergic. There's a McDonald's down the street if you're really hungry." I quickly rushed out of the building before I said anything that I would regret. Rhonda was very close to her uncle, and I didn't want to tell him that she was a very difficult employee. I drove straight to McDonald's. Not my favorite, but it was fast. After I ordered, I noticed my coworker Nick was eating in the corner. He worked in accounting, and I had a little crush on him for a couple months now. He wasn't the hardest worker, from what I heard, but God was he handsome. I was surprised a guy with his physique would ever eat McDonald's. He waved over at me, and so I sat with him. I never talked to him outside of work before, but we started vibing right away. We ended up sitting together for an extra 30 minutes just because we were so lost in conversation. Then he looked down at his watch and said that he had to hurry back to work. I did too. We got in our separate cars and drove back to the office. I felt like I was on cloud 9 until I remembered that I was late. I didn't have any meetings yet, but I didn't trust Rhonda to handle things without me. I rushed back to my department, and Rhonda greeted me at her desk. To my surprise, I didn't miss anything. Nothing bad happened in my absence. I had taken some personal time to myself, and the world didn't collapse. Rhonda apparently was thinking the same thing because she said, "You always work through your lunches. You should go off-site more often. A lot of people do. That hot guy in accounting goes to McDonald's almost every day." That was a very persuasive argument. If I went to McDonald's, I'd get to see Nick again. I was too busy to go every day, but I could go once a week, Wednesdays. And every time I went, Nick was there. Sometimes he'd be there first, sometimes I would. We'd always order separately and then sit together. They weren't dates per se, even though I really, really liked him. And I think he liked me too. We had real connections, but I was too afraid to make the first move. Over the next few weeks, our Wednesday lunch dates got longer and longer. But whenever I went back to the office, Rhonda always had everything under control. Still, she made some mistakes, but she was getting better. I even decided to give her some responsibilities to see if she could handle it. Data entry mostly. When I was gone, she was in charge for filing separate spreadsheets on my computer. One morning, I saw Nick walking through the department. I actually hadn't seen him in the office since we started having our lunches together. He was always so busy. Right away, I knew that he was coming to see me. Our connection was too strong to be confined to a fast food restaurant. My heart raced. But then Nick approached Rhonda, and the two of them ducked quietly into a supply closet. He didn't even realize that I had seen him. Obviously, I pushed my ear against the door to hear what was going on. They were talking about me. I couldn't hear all the words, but I heard my name a couple of times, and the words 23,000. I looked around. The rest of the office was empty. Everyone was off at some meeting. I dragged a chair to the closet door and wedged against the handle, trapping them both inside. I didn't say anything. I kept listening, and slowly, I was able to figure out their plan. Rhonda and Nick were a couple. That was pretty clear. They were also working together to steal from me. Nick would keep me at McDonald's for as long as they needed, while Rhonda used my personal computer to rewire money from my bank accounts. She took small amounts each week, but over time, she managed to accumulate $23,000. Furious, I ran back to my desk and opened my bank account. Sure enough, money had been transferred into some foreign account. It happened like clockwork, every Wednesday at lunch. I felt like such a moron. I should have figured this out sooner, but I guess I was so distracted by Nick. He really fooled me. I called the police, and they charged back to the supply closet. Rhonda and Nick had already realized that they were trapped in the closet. They screamed and pounded on the door. "Who's in there?" I asked. They both went quiet. "You locked us in, huh?" Rhonda asked through the door. "Yep." "You know about the money?" Rhonda asked. "I know everything," I said. "Except the reason why. I won't let you out until you tell me." She didn't. That's probably the most frustrating part of this whole story. He had such a whiny voice when he apologized, and he tried to blame everything on Rhonda. Then Rhonda tried to shift the blame back to me. As they were explaining their many crimes, the police arrived. They stood with me and listened to the confessions on the other side of the door. Our boss, Rhonda's uncle, came with the police. He looked livid. He kicked the chair away, flung open the door, and let the cops take them both away. Since then, I got all my money back. I also got a promotion. I'm not sure what happened to Nick and Rhonda, but they don't work here anymore.
I clicked on the lights in my office and sat down with a grumbled sigh, still half asleep. It was barely past 7 o'clock in the morning, but I'd had an urgent email come through from a potential client, and I had to drag myself to work to check it out. As a private investigator on the higher end of the scale, it was only expected of me to be on call at all times, even this early in the morning. I checked the email while I waited for the coffee machine to kick in, scanning my eyes several times over the text until I had all the details. Rich family, missing kid. That was the general gist of it. Though the family name made me do a double take. The Reynolds. Everyone knew the Reynolds for their lavish lifestyle and perfect family. They were a pillar of the community. Although they exuded wealth, they did their part to donate to charity and uphold a likable public image. It was the youngest son and heir to their massive wealth who had gone missing, a young man by the name of Jason Reynolds. As far as I recalled from seeing him in the media, he was the family's golden child, the smart and successful one who had practically usurped all of his older siblings as the favorite. After I accepted the job and received my initial payment, I kicked off the preliminary investigation into Jason's disappearance. The first point of call was to track his last known whereabouts and liaisons, and determine who had seen him last and where. From there, I could start to build a picture of what might have happened in the time afterwards. I spent the next few days interviewing everyone who was part of his personal life, from his parents to his siblings to the serving and cleaning staff that resided in their family home. They all said a similar thing. Nobody had seen Jason since he left the house alone late one Friday evening. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, and he had hired a cab instead of taking their private chauffeur. It was Jason's mother, Julia, who caught my interest the most. She answered all my questions in a similar manner to the others, but as we were leaving, she looked as though she was about to say something else. "Is there something on your mind?" I prompted when she hesitated, her gaze flicking up to meet mine before darting away again. Definitely a sign that she was hiding something. No, it's fine. Please, just find my son," was all she said, before flicking her wrist for one of the staff members to show me out. I watched her go, curiously, and then I made a mental note of it before leaving. Whatever she was hiding, it would come to light eventually. That was my job, after all, discovering all the secrets that people wanted to keep hidden. With the interviews not giving me much to go on, I instead turned my focus to figuring out where the cab had taken him on Friday evening. There was a reason he hadn't taken the family's driver. He didn't want anyone to know where he was going. According to his older sister, she'd seen him climb into a cab from a local company who had an office not too far away from my own. Since it was my only lead for the moment, I decided to pursue it and paid a visit to the cab company's headquarters. "Excuse me, does anyone recognize this young man?" I asked, showing the picture of Jason to the drivers. One of them spoke up from the back after studying the picture closely. "Yeah, I know him. Took him someplace downtown on Friday night. I remember because he tipped real well." That sounded like Jason. Do you remember the name of the place you dropped him off? The man nodded and scribbled something down on a piece of paper. An address. Thanks, you've been a great help, I told him before climbing back into my car and heading to the location that the driver had taken him. The address ended up belonging to a shady-looking bar in the downtown area of the city. Judging by the folks hanging around the street corners, it definitely wasn't somewhere the son of a rich family should be visiting on a Friday night. What had he been doing all the way out here? It was looking to me like perhaps he was involved in business he shouldn't be. Business that would definitely ruin his and his family's reputation if it were to go public. The Reynolds' golden boy wasn't perhaps as charming and innocent as he had everyone believing. I spoke to the people inside the club and followed the further clues they provided, until I came across a name of interest. Peter Lotz. According to one of the witnesses, they had seen Peter confront Jason outside the bar, before the two of them had left together. With this information, I finally had a key suspect in Jason's disappearance. While searching for Peter's whereabouts, I did some digging into his life to see if he had any connection to Jason that I could use to fuel the investigation. According to some obscure articles I found online, Peter had lost his daughter some months ago. Now, while some sources posited it as an accident, there were others that were ruling foul play, specifically murder. By then, I was starting to formulate a potential series of events that had led to Jason's disappearance. If he was involved in some dangerous business, well, then murder wouldn't be too far off that list either. Was that what his mother had been hiding? Had she known that her son was somehow involved with dangerous people? Had she known what he'd done? By the time we tracked Peter down, it was already too late. We found Jason's body in the basement, his corpse cold and bloody. He deserved it, Peter kept muttering once the police came to arrest him. He deserved it. He had it coming. He deserved it. He deserved it all. Later, after managing to get a coherent statement from Peter, he told us he had kidnapped and killed Jason in retaliation for Jason murdering his daughter in a drug deal gone wrong. Jason's mother had paid him a large sum of money to keep quiet about the fact, but the guilt and lack of justice had driven him to take things into his own hands. In the end, it was Jason's own actions and his mother's attempts to hush it up that had gotten him killed.
I never thought that a knock on the door could change everything. But that morning, it did. For 6 months, the four of us had fallen into a routine that felt like some cruel joke. Rhett, Oliver, Steve, and I, carpenters by trade, unemployed by circumstance, had spent each day in a desperate search for work. Rhett and Oliver, seasoned craftsmen, had taught me most of what I knew. Steve, on the other hand, had always been the strong, silent type. A big guy, built solid, but with a quietness that made him seem distant, like he was lost in a place none of us could reach. We'd start each day the same. Breakfast at the diner down the street, coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and stale conversation about our empty prospects. Then, we'd head back to my place, scouring the job ads over a couple beers, pretending we didn't know what the results would be. No work, no hope. That morning, though, was different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sort of quiet that wasn't natural. Rhett was pacing, his eyes darting to the window every few seconds. Oliver was unusually silent, tapping his fingers on the edge of the table. Steve just sat there, staring at the wall like he was trying to see through it. "I don't like this," Rhett muttered. He had this way of reading the room, sensing that things were off. I think that's why he was always the one taking charge, keeping us focused. "Yeah, something's up," Oliver agreed, though he didn't stop his tapping. I looked at Steve, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but he just kept staring at the wall. It was like he knew something we didn't. Then came a knock. 3 quick taps on the door, sharp and urgent. My heart skipped a beat, and I could see the tension ripple through the group. I don't know why, but something about that knock made my skin crawl. I opened the door to find a man standing there, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, like it had been borrowed. He was tall, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though it wasn't sunny out. He looked official, but in a way that didn't sit right with me, like a wolf dressed as a sheep. "Are you gentlemen looking for work?" he asked, his voice smooth, but with an edge to it. "Yeah, we are," I said, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "I've got a job for you. It pays well, but it's not exactly conventional," he said, pulling out a card and handing it to me. "Meet me at this address tonight at 9 p.m. We will discuss the details." The man turned and left before I could ask anything more, leaving us standing there, staring at the card in my hand. It had no name, just an address scribbled in ink. "What do you think?" Rhett asked, his voice low. "I don't think we have a choice," I replied, feeling the weight of those 6 months of unemployment pressing down on me. We needed money, needed something to give us purpose again. We showed up at the address at night, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The man was waiting for us there, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men stood beside him, both of them built like they could break you in half. The job was simple, at least on paper. The man needed some carpentry work done, reinforcing a room in the basement of a warehouse. He didn't say why, and we didn't ask. But as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Why would anyone need a room this secure?" Oliver whispered to me as we nailed thick wooden beams into place. "Don't think about it," I whispered back. But I was thinking about it, and I knew the others were too, especially Steve. He'd been acting strange since we got here, his unusual silence replaced by a kind of brooding intensity. I caught him staring at the door to the room more than once, like he was waiting for someone to come through. We finished the job and we were about to leave when the man stopped us. "One more thing," he said, that smooth edge to his voice now sharper. "You can't tell anyone about this, ever." There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold, like it wasn't a request. It was a threat. We walked out of there with our pay, but none of us felt good about it. The silence between us was heavy, and I could see the same question in Rhett and Oliver's eyes that was in mine. What had we just been a part of? The next day, Steve was gone, disappeared without a word, without a trace. We tried calling him. We went by his place, but it's like he vanished into thin air. A few days later, we saw the news. A body had been found in the river, beaten beyond recognition. They didn't say it was Steve, but I knew. We all did. I couldn't stop thinking about that room we built, the man's cold eyes, and Steve's haunted silence. Months passed and we tried to move on, but the past has a way of catching up. One night, I got another knock on the door, but this time it was Rhett. "I found something," he said, holding out a worn notebook. It was Steve's notebook. Inside were notes scribbled about the job, the man, and something else. Something about a hidden compartment in the room. We went back to the warehouse, just Rhett and me. I wasn't sure what we were looking for, but we had to know. We found the compartment, just like Steve had written. Inside, there was cash. A lot of it. But there was also a letter. It was from Steve. He knew. He knew what the room was for, what it was hiding. And he knew that the man wasn't going to just let us walk away. But Steve had a plan. He took something valuable from the man, something that would make him think twice before coming after us. The cash was his way of making sure we would be okay, that we could get out and start over. We did. We left town that night, splitting the cash between us. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to leave the darkness behind and find some light again. In the end, Steve saved us. And although guilt still lingers, I know he did what he had to for us.
It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy, thick with something intangible yet unsettling. The kind of night where silence hung like a weight, and every rustle of the wind sent a shiver down your spine. We had always been the adventurous type, my friends and I, but something about this night was different. It wasn't just the darkness, or the fact that we were deep in the woods, miles away from any semblance of civilization. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But that didn't stop us. Nothing ever did. The village we lived in was more of a ghost town than anything else. Most houses were abandoned, relics from a time long gone, almost a century old. Exploring them had become our obsession, our way of shaking off the boredom of small-town life. There was me, always the cautious one, Jason, who was brave to the point of recklessness, Megan, my best friend since kindergarten, who always had something to prove, and Sarah, the quiet observer with a knack for sensing things the rest of us couldn't. We'd been hearing rumors about a particular house hidden deep in the forest that bordered our town. The locals called it the Widow's House, claiming it had been abandoned for nearly a century, its last inhabitant a woman who vanished without a trace. They said the house was cursed, that anyone who ventured too close would never return the same. Naturally, we had to check it out. The house stood eerily still when we found it, a looming shadow in the dark, its windows like empty eyes staring into the void. The moonlight barely reached it through the thick canopy of trees, casting long, twisted shadows that made the whole place look like something out of a nightmare. "Looks like it's still standing," Jason muttered as we approached. The door was jammed shut, but we were used to that. With some effort, we climbed through a cracked window, landing in a dank, musty room. The air was thick with the stench of rot, like old meat left to spoil. Giant bugs skittered across the floor, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. I wanted to leave right then, but Megan nudged me forward. We split up to cover more ground. Jason and Sarah took the stairs to the second floor, while Megan and I stayed on the first. The house creaked and groaned under our weight, as though it resented our presence. Every step felt like an intrusion, every breath an offense to whatever had been left behind. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night, freezing us in our tracks. It wasn't coming from the house, but from the forest, somewhere beyond the dark path that led into the depths of the trees. We rushed outside, the house forgotten in an instant. The path into the forest was a black void, impossible to see through, even with the light of our phones. "I'm going to check it out," Megan declared, her voice resolute. Her eyes gleamed with that familiar determination, the need to prove she wasn't afraid, that she was braver than the rest of us. Jason and Sarah hesitated, their faces pale. I tried to convince her to stay, to wait for daylight, or for us to go together. But Megan was stubborn, calling us cowards before disappearing into the inky darkness. Minutes felt like hours as we stood there, listening to the silence that followed. Then, another scream, this one unmistakably Megan's, pierced the night. Without thinking, we plunged into the forest, our fear forgotten as panic set in. We searched for what felt like hours, calling her name, shining our lights into every shadow, but Megan was nowhere to be found. Eventually, we had to face the truth. She was gone. The police searched the forest and the surrounding areas for weeks. They found nothing. No tracks, no sign of struggle, nothing. Megan had simply vanished, as if the forest had swallowed her whole. The town was in shock. But life went on, as it always does.
I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the purse lying there, right in the middle of my cousin's front yard. It had been almost a week since the break-in, and we were all still on edge, jumping at every creak in the house. But seeing the purse, seemingly untouched except for the missing cash, brought back a flood of memories and questions. "Hey, Megan, come here," I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of relief and confusion. Megan came rushing out, her face pale with anxiety. When she saw her purse, she let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "How did it get here?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. We both stared at it for a moment before she gingerly picked it up and looked inside. Her debit and credit cards were still there, untouched. Only the cash was missing. "This is so weird," Megan muttered, shaking her head. "Why would they return it?" I shrugged, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe they just wanted the money and didn't care about the rest, but why bring it back? Over the next few days, we tried to piece together what had happened. Megan called the police again to update them, but they didn't have much to add. There were no new leads, no suspicious activity reported in the neighborhood. It was like the thief had vanished into thin air. As we sat on Megan's porch one evening, sipping coffee and trying to make sense of it all, a thought struck me. What if it wasn't a thief? I mused aloud. Megan looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? Think about it. If someone broke in just for the money, why would they risk coming back to return the purse? It doesn't make sense. What if it was someone we know? Megan frowned, considering the idea. But who would do that, and why? I didn't have an answer, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes and ears open, watching for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I noticed something strange. One of Megan's neighbors, Mr. Thompson, seemed unusually interested in the whole affair. He was always around asking questions, offering unsolicited advice, and generally being more involved than necessary. "Megan, have you noticed how nosy Mr. Thompson has been lately?" I asked one afternoon as we were organizing the garage. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's weird. He's never really talked to us much before, but now he's always around." A creeping suspicion began to form in my head. "Do you think he could have something to do with this?" Megan looked shocked. "Mr. Thompson? No way, he's just a lonely old man." "Maybe," I conceded, but I wasn't convinced. That night, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I waited until it was dark, then slipped out of the house and made my way to Mr. Thompson's place. His lights were off, and there was no sign of movement inside. I crept around to the back, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in his trash can, I found something that made my blood run cold. Crumpled at the bottom was a piece of paper with Megan's name on it. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting, apologizing for taking the money and explaining that he was desperate and needed it to pay some overdue bills. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Thompson, the quiet, unassuming neighbor, had broken into Megan's house and stolen her money. But why return the purse? I took the note back to Megan, and we confronted Mr. Thompson the next day. He broke down in tears, confessing everything. He had lost his job and was struggling to make ends meet. He knew it was wrong, but he was desperate. After taking the money, guilt had consumed him, and he returned the purse hoping to alleviate some of his shame. We were both shocked and saddened by his confession. In the end, we decided not to press charges. Instead, we helped Mr. Thompson get in touch with some local community services that could assist him.